Hi there folks, Paul here. Okay, let's wrap up with this teaching on chapter 14 of Luke. We've gone through the previous sections, this incredible Sabbath meal which was set up by one of the rulers of the Pharisees as a trap for Jesus. And he addresses them directly in this. He speaks directly to the rulers. He talks to some of the guests. He also talks to his disciples. And now from verse 25 of Luke chapter 14, it says, "A great multitudes went with him, and he turned and he said to them." I'll pause just for one moment here. Quick explanation. As I went through the seating arrangements earlier, we also need to understand, this fellow who's hosting this meal, He is wealthy. By our standards, he's probably a multi-millionaire if we were to draw some kind of comparison, because he has room enough in this, what we'll say is an open courtyard, first of all, for many guests, for the disciples as well, at different tables. And it also says that there were great multitudes who were following Jesus, and he now addresses them. So we can only assume that he gets up and he goes and actually talks to them. Now, some will teach this and say that he left and he went and spoke to them. But if we continue further down, we see reference of, in chapter 15, they're complaining, the Pharisees and the scribes, and they're complaining, saying, but look, he's eating with these people. So I'm going to assume it's the same meal. And more so, if we go back just a moment into Luke 7, and have a look over a couple of pages back in verse 36, we see here then one of the Pharisees asked him to eat with him. It's not uncommon. They're always looking for ways to trap him and find something to accuse him. And he went to the Pharisee's house and sat down to eat. And behold, this is verse 37 of 7, a woman in the city who was a sinner, when she knew that Jesus sat at the table of the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster flask of fragrant oil, and stood at his feet behind him. See, it shows, I mentioned earlier, they're often cushions, and this is the way they would sit and lean. So she's at his feet, which are curled up behind him here, weeping. And she began to wash his feet with her tears and wipe them with her hair. And verse 39, when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he spoke, saying, this man, if he were a prophet, he would know who and what manner of woman this is whom is touching him. Oh, she's a sinner. I used to always wonder, how does this woman who is a sinner, be it she's an adulteress or a prostitute or whatever, this is what we get from this text. How does she get into a Pharisee's house where they're eating? Except for the open court, which was not uncommon. And in that, we have the open court where there are those who are enjoying the meal, and then outside, open at least on one side, the court where others can come. We see it, the message of Lazarus and, the rich man, and Lazarus waiting outside to grab crumbs off the table of the rich man. And we're also going to be looking at that later, coming up in another video shortly soon. So this is not uncommon for them to have this type of arrangement. And these are the multitudes that Jesus is talking to now. Before I get to that, though, let me just share something beautiful. We go back to Luke chapter 7. Jesus, addressing this, says, therefore, look, I say this to you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. But to whom little is forgiven, the same loves little. I wanted to just share that because that is just one of the most beautiful verses I think I've ever heard. I was sharing with the minister, actually, one of the local churches recently, and just sharing my passion and my love and the look on his face. And I paused and I said, forgive me for being so passionate. But I know what Jesus has forgiven me for. And that's why I love so much. And that's where that comes from. To whom much is forgiven, we love much. And to whom little is forgiven, they love little. Now, I'm not saying you should go out and be you're the worst possible sinner you can and come and find redemption and forgiveness. No. But I was. And that's why I'm just so thankful for that. But back on track. Luke 14, verse 25, great multitudes went with him, and he turned and he said to them, and I've got to explain this now, why he says what he says. He is addressing their misconception, their misunderstanding of who he is. I mean, they're hearing him, take out to him who interrupted, and this Pharisee, and that Pharisee. And they're probably going, yeah, go get him, because they're following him. They're following him as he's heading towards Jerusalem. Chances are they're following him because they think he's going to overthrow Rome. That was the misconception that so many of the time had, understanding nothing of the kingdom of God and spiritual or heavenly things. And so knowing this, he turns to them straight away, probably goes up and takes some bread with him and says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. As my kids would say, oof, ouch. If you do not hate them, that's got to leave a moment for pause. But what does it mean really? The word hate, in the Greek, it is the hate. It means to hate, to detest, or to love less. If you don't love your mother, your father, your brother, your wife, your children less than you love me, you cannot be my disciple. That's a hard saying. That's not halfway. That's not halfway Christianity, is it? Not even close. He says, whoever does not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Now, bearing the cross in this reference is to the cost of being a disciple. And I've touched on it quickly before, but in more detail. Very simply, a believer, a follower, and a disciple. These three different levels of our growth in Christ. It starts with belief, no question. But we can believe we believe on Sundays. Don't change our life Monday through Saturday. We can even say, hey, we follow you and we do a bit of this and we do a bit of that and we wear the T-shirts. Notice I'm wearing the T-shirt for illustration. You can be a Christian, but you're not a disciple. A disciple is a different thing. We're going to talk about that in just a moment because that's the point of today's message. These people whom he's addressing, they're followers. I mean, their understanding, their belief is completely misconstrued. They don't understand at all. But they're still following him even for what they think he is. And he's addressing that by getting straight to the core of it. As he said in Matthew, I think it was the very end, chapter 28, go into all the world, make disciples in every nation, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. These are not light, cushy words. And he says here, for which of you, verse 28 in 14, for which of you intending to build a tower does not sit down first, here it is again, and count the cost, whether he has enough to finish it. And likely this is referring to when you had a field, say, for example, we talked earlier about the field and so on. And the produce, actually, no, that's coming up, sorry. That's in chapter 16. But when you have a field and produce and you want to build a tower, like a little watchtower, you're going to build it so you can see over everything, keep an eye on everything and look and see what's going on with the workers. And so they'd understand this type of analogy. Which of you, having a tower, doesn't first count the cost to see if he has enough to finish it? Lest after he has laid the foundation and he's not able to finish it, all who see begin to laugh. They mock him. You're an idiot. You shouldn't have even started. Look how foolish that is. A couple of sticks in the air. No tower. Pfft. And they say in verse 30, this man began to build but was not able to finish. Or what king, he says in verse 31, goes to make war against another king, does not sit down first and consider the cost, whether he's able to, with 10,000, to meet him who comes against him with 20. Or else, while the other is still a great way off, sends a delegation and asks conditions of peace. They understand these terminology because this was their time, their way, the world that they lived in. And so likewise, here it is again, verse 33, whoever of you does not forsake all that he has. he cannot be my disciple. They're heavy words, folks. Hard words. Cannot be my disciple. So my call to you today is to think about where you are at in your walk with Christ. Believer? Just a believer? I know some churches, they'll say, hey, that's all, you're fine, you believe, you're okay. It's not what Jesus calls you to be. Are you a follower? You're like these people, you have an idea of who Jesus is, you think this is the way it should be, and you're going to follow along, follow the crowd. I mean, it was popular. It was popular to follow Jesus because he's going to go and overtake Rome. It was a popular movement, and popular movements like that, popular churches, the big crowds, the music and everything that come with it, popular. You get dressed, you go on Instagram, you look good. It's popular. Followers. But then there's this thing. Whoever of you does not forsake all that he has cannot be my disciple. And that's what I'm calling you out on today. Whether you are a believer or a follower, or are you a disciple? Have you forsaken all? Are you prepared to? Do you follow him that strongly that you'll do as he commanded you to do, like it says in Matthew 28? And then he wraps up this section saying, salt is good, but if the salt has lost its flavour, how shall it be seasoned? And salt in those days were used for many different things. Preservatives, flavour. I mean, you can toss salt on the ground and it'll kill the grass for the path. Salt has a purpose. So does a disciple. It has a purpose. And if it's lost its flavour, lost its edge, lost its power, it's worthless. He says it is neither fit for the land nor for the dunghill. For men just throw it out. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. And so I say to you, do you have ears to hear? And if you're hearing and going, I want that, but I'm not sure I am that yet, pray about it. And I will pray about it for you. That God would grant you the understanding to understand these things and more, as so many times Paul prayed. I pray that God will grant you the understanding of the height, the depth, the width. You know the verse. The understanding of who Jesus is and then who we are in him. That's what I pray for you. And that is discipleship. Because now the next thing is this. Go and disciple others. That's the command from Matthew 28. Go into all the world, make disciples in every nation. And you don't need to travel the world to do that. Just look in your circle of influence, in your church, wherever you are. Go and make disciples for Jesus Christ. Bless you. We'll start off again in chapter 15. Next video, the parable of the lost sheep. Oh boy, that was me. I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.